Well, hello, friends. I hope you're having a great day today, and I do trust that you are believing God that He is going to do great things in your life all day long. Hey, why don't you just go ahead and trust Him today? Why don't you take a step of faith and stretch yourself out there and just trust and believe that God is going to do great and awesome things. Hey, let me tell you something. I know I don't always do this, but while I'm talking about God doing amazing and impossible things, the pastor at Foley First Assembly of God, Pastor Judd Sessions. If when you pray today, please remember him in prayer. He's in his 50s, a great super guy there, great man of God. He has been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and it has already spread to his spine and to his brain. And so he needs a miracle from God, and we know that He's able. So today in your prayer time, take the opportunity to pray for Pastor Judd Sessions and his wife and the people there at Foley First Assembly of God. He needs a touch from God, and we know that our God is able. Well, hey, it's Tuesday now, and we're about to get into another edition of Take 5, and we are dealing with the subject that we've called the process of neglect. We've been reading some scripture and talking about Proverbs chapter 24, verses 30 through 34, and we're going to talk about them some more a little bit today. In the verses that we have read, Solomon recounts a time where he journeyed past a local field there and a vineyard, and even though he was the wisest man that ever lived, anybody could see that there was a problem going on in this field if you just were to look at it. It was overgrown with thorns, the ground was covered with nettles, the wall that once protected this estate has been broken down now, and so there's really an issue, and anybody can see that. Now you need to understand that in these days, agriculture was a very honorable profession. Farmers and husbandmen were well respected, but the owner of this field gets no respect from Solomon whatsoever because of the condition that it's in. In fact, Solomon calls him out, and he calls him slothful and lazy and lacking sense. He's not very polite in the things that he has to say there. He calls out the obvious neglect that this man has and proclaims that the results of this man's laziness is going to be imminent poverty for him and his family. You know, I'm afraid that when you flip the coin now and compare this to us, spiritually speaking, I'm afraid that there are many of our brothers and sisters in the church who are headed towards spiritual poverty the same way that this guy was. Even worse, some of them may already be there simply because of this process of neglect. Neglect is a process of events that will lead to the subsequent ruin of anything in which it is allowed to exist. If you neglect anything, it will go from decay to destruction. You can just write it down. It will happen. If you neglect your health, it'll go from decay to destruction. If you neglect relationships, same thing. And when it comes to our spiritual health, the same applies there as well. No one that's ever walked with God gets lost by taking one misstep. You don't backslide overnight. You don't grow cold overnight. It just doesn't happen. It's a process that happens when we neglect little thing after little thing after little thing, and the next thing you know, we've got a major problem in our life. All of this happened because of neglect. So it does not happen overnight. It is a process. I want to read 2 verses from Proverbs 24, and I want to start addressing today, and we'll carry it on in tomorrow, the crisis of spiritual neglect. This great problem, and let's look at this thing from Solomon's point of view. Proverbs 24:30, he said, I passed by the field of a sluggard, past the vineyard of a man lacking sense. So he wasn't very polite, was he? Behold, it was all overgrown with thorns, the ground was covered with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down. Now, without a doubt, if the owner of this property refuses to give proper attention to the issues at hand, it's just going to get worse. It's not going to get better. Nothing corrects itself, my friend. And that's why it's so important for us, spiritually speaking, not to neglect our spiritual health. Because if we have a problem, if we make a mistake, it's not going to correct itself. If we refuse to address the spiritual crisis in our lives, things only get worse. So what's the solution? Glad you asked. We have to honestly appraise our spiritual condition and make sure that we have not become slothful and lazy concerning the things of God. And to get an honest appraisal out of people, it's hard. Now, you know how we do. We will quickly give you our honest opinion about someone else, right? But concerning us, we don't always honestly appraise and address ourselves. Even though the Bible tells us, 1 Corinthians 11:28, when he was talking about communion, he says, examine yourself to make sure you're doing it with the right heart. So he says that we need to take an honest appraisal of ourselves. And Paul didn't stop there, because in the second letter to Corinthians, chapter 13, verse 5, he said, examine yourselves to make sure you are in the faith. So this is a big deal. We're supposed to look at our lives and make an honest appraisal and not neglect them, because if we neglect them, these thorns and these briars and these nettles that start with just a little shoot coming through the ground will grow and grow and grow if we neglect it, and soon it'll overrun our whole life. You refuse to address the issues at hand, and your spiritual life will wither away. Your heart will become hard and like uncultivated ground. And if you're not careful, you'll get indifferent to the things of God. This field that Solomon was talking about there was not consumed with weeds and nettles overnight. It was an extended period of neglect that caused this. So if you find yourself slacking in worship, away from God, slacking in service and prayer and discipline and things like that, chances are these things have gone unaddressed for some time. It just didn't start. You begin by little steps, and then little by little you walk farther and farther away from God. This crisis of spiritual neglect starts with the little things. It starts when you take your eyes off God. That's when it starts. David Wilkerson said this. He said, the river of neglect slowly carries you farther and farther away from the Lord. And the farther downstream you go, the swifter and more dangerous the river becomes. You don't know it, but there are raging falls ahead, a place where there are forces beyond your control, a place of no turning back, a place of shipwreck. Friend, that is not where we want to end up, shipwreck in our faith, especially when all we have to do is not be slothful, not be lazy, not be neglectful, and address the issues when they begin to sprout up. Well, hey, I got to get out of here. It's been great being with you today. I look forward to being with you tomorrow on Wednesday's edition of Take 5. Hey, do me a favor. Remember our prayer requests. Keep praying for Pastor Judd Sessions and the people at Foley First Assembly of God. He needs a miracle, and we know that our God is able. God bless you. Have a great day.